What's up, guys? PDC here, and I am back, but this time we're not playing Pokemon, we're analyzing it. Um, so anyway, my first video, which I decided to do, was one that I had planned to do in the past and originally was a bit different. This is more of a theoretical outlook at DPP. It's postmodern DPP, and as you can see, because I have evolved into an esoteric, artistic son of a bitch, I have a piece of postmodernist art in the background, and I made a little slideshow. Because I figured that'd be the easiest way to present this, so I could have all my information in one space. Postmodern DPP is not really a thing, it's just a phrase, but in a way, I think it kind of describes the metagame accurately in that it's very, very weird, and a lot of people actually hate DPP now. Um, for a tier which used to be loved and probably was the fan favorite, like, I honestly can't think of a tier which people liked, more than Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum at all. Like, it's been a favorite for a long time, and now a lot of people seem to hate it. The paradigm is shifting, and people actually dislike DPP. So anyway, this is what works in the strange metagame of DPP as it is now. I'll be going through team archetypes, all different types of builds, ranging from the typical standard ones which you see in pretty much every tournament in DPP, to the more obscure to pretty much the evolution of the metagame. I'm not going to be showing you any like strange sets because, like I said, this is more about the standardized metagame. I could go over in a future video certain anti-meta sets or anti-meta trends, which I can possibly see becoming like the counter standard, the counterculture. But for now, I am just going to be looking at what is, because I don't think this video would really do any better if I go and be like, oh yeah, let's extend it to talk about anti-metagame trends. But anyway, let's begin. So this is DPP as it is. I picked out 4 really uber standard teams and builds and archetypes which highlight the types of things which you're going to see. Sorry guys, no importance. An incredibly centralized metagame based upon these specific 4 builds and the discoveries that pretty much drive them to be the best. I'll be going over each of these in detail, and I'll be talking about how these shape the metagame. So first off, you have the first team. I'm going to be doing 1, 2, 3, and 4. Hippowdon. This team is not exactly ultra standard. I don't see this everywhere in tournaments, but the build is what matters. You can have a Nidoqueen over the Hippowdon and Roserade. You can have, something like a Skarmory for spikes. But the basic defensive Clefable, Zapdos, Jirachi, Clefable, ground type with rocks, T-Spike, Starmie build. That type of stall build is pretty much everywhere now. And this team is not an exception. This is a pretty standard, popular, little sand stall. It was made by BKC. And what the one you want to be paying attention to here is Clefable, or Clefable. Shout out Tony Flygon. Clefable. Anyway, Clefable is incredibly important in DPP now. It is probably one of the most popular Muns at the high level of play because of its utility and ability to outright run through stall. Clefable is an anti-stall Mun and an amazing check to things like Specs Kingdra, Scarpetran, or, regular Heatran, any special threat like Zapdos or Jolteon, because not only does it not give a damn about hazards, it is incredibly flexible in use and has a move pool which, while not I wouldn't say it's incredibly varied, the utility aspects of it are wide enough that it can fit, quite a few options of moves on its set. Like, for example, you can have a defensive set with S-Toss, Soft Boiled, and you can have, like, Knockoff Toxic, or you can have T-Wave Knockoff. Which sounds like it's not big of a difference, and usually T-Wave is preferred because T-Wave is probably one of the best moves in the metagame, but you have a decent amount of defensive options at your disposal. You can even run something like Ice Beam as like a 4th move. I haven't really seen that, that often. I mean, it's probably only going to be useful for certain things, but I really would have to suggest Clefable on any defensive team just because of how many roles it covers. This is a standard build right now. It is a stall which does not really lose to other stall, and because of moves like Knockoff on Clefable, or if you're opting for a Calm Mindset, it doesn't lose to other stall. In fact, most stall games, if they both have Clefable, and it's both Calm Mind, really just come down to that, because stalls answers to a Calm Mind Clefable, or even a regular Knockoff Clefable, because it can switch into pretty much anything and annoy the hell out of you at Knockoff. Stall's answers to Clefable, especially a common Clefable, basically comes down to, can I last money with my own Jirachi, or do I have a Tyranitar, hopefully a choice banded Tyranitar, which can pursue this thing twice and kill it. Clefable is an anti-Stallmon and a Utopian Stall member at the same time. Its duality allows you to pretty much fulfill any role you need on a Stall team that isn't a physical wall. It's amazing, and it changed the metagame fundamentally thanks to Heist, who I believe was the real introducer of this Pokemon. I don't remember what, I think it was the Venusaur, Gliscor, Powdon team, which I actually probably should have included that team, but you don't see that specific build too much anymore. It kind of falls apart to things like Breloom, but although I could probably just add Aerial's Gliscor to fix it. But the point is, this is a very standard build which subsists on being able to counter most balances, not counter, but being able to survive most balances, and not being able to falter the most offenses. It still has a lot of trouble with things like Breloom, just by virtue of Breloom being an amazing mon, but Fable in its own right does amazing things. It stops momentum, it's an amazing asset to any defensive team, and there's a reason why Clefable is so popular. Just looking at offensive water types like Melodic, Cresselia, Kingdra, Zapdos that are present in these other teams, Heatran, Clefable pretty much can switch in and beat them all, and at the same time, even physically, Clefable has enough defense when even just slight investment is put in that it can tank weaker physical attacks and switch in on things like Hippowdon and Swampert, or even stay in and wall Choice Scarf Flygon. It's an amazing Pokemon, and if there's a reason this team is used so much. It is, I would say, the current defensive paradigm of the metagame, give or take. Just the sole use of ground, T-Spikes, Spikes optional, Jirachi, Clefable. You don't even need a spinner necessarily, because Clefable is better than Blissey in the way that it doesn't need a spinner to function. Blissey gets worn down to hell when it has hazards, just as little as Stealth Rock plus Sand on its side. Blissey is going to be soft boiling pretty often. But Clefable doesn't need that. Even though it has less special defense, overall, it survives and has a higher survivability. Yeah, it can get pursued still, but it's a very valuable member in that hazards do not wear it down. It has to be hit. The second team and the third team are relatively similar. The second team is a standard BKC build, and the third team is my build that I use versus Kevin Garrett in SPL7 semis, I believe, when I was on the Wolfpack. These are both pretty similar in actual archetype, because as you can see, T-Tar, Breloom, Heatran is the common theme on these teams. And then you have a Scarfer, which I believe on BKC's team it is Scarftran, and my team it is Scarf Flygon. I have a lot of teams very similar to the Scarf Flygon build because I think that this build is just so good. This is the standard team in the metagame, bar none, or builds like these, which have this Fire, Water, Grass core plus a Tyranitar, and then a Scarf or something to gain momentum. But Breloom is the real, well, Breloom and T-Tar, the Breloom T-Tar core is amazing, but I'll elaborate on that more later. But Breloom is the real centerpiece here. Breloom fucking destroys defensive teams. It goes at them, it breaks them apart, and it is an amazing utility and member to have on essentially every single team that can identify with balance or not hyper offense. Breloom is amazing because teams like the one I mentioned in the first round, with the Powdon, Roserade, the defensive builds, Breloom tears them apart, or at the very least opens them up. It's an old adage to say that Breloom cannot be your only stall breaker, and that is very true, but Breloom can be your main stall breaker and only have minimal support and still get the job done on teams that aren't incredibly hard-bodied. If they don't have a Sleep Talker or a Constant Spinner, they're going to be in trouble, because Rocks plus Breloom equals death for a lot of defensive teams. Zapdos is not an answer, and Celebi is not an answer either, because when paired with Tyranitar, it absolutely destroys it. These teams are popular because they pretty much close out the competition and are all around good. If, for you guys who don't play DPP, think of late stage Oras. Think of the late metagame. Think of Oras when it was just Torn T, Rocky Helmet Chomp, Clefable, Slowbro, Balance, stuff like that. Those teams are good because they're universal. They're good because they cover everything. They're good because they can be varied, but the same. Both of these teams subsist on the same integral core of Fire, Water, Grass plus a Tyranitar for sand support to pretty much create a very effective stall breaking core. I chose Gengar, he chose Scizor and Zapdos, and I have Melodic and Flygon and Gengar. But fundamentally, they're pretty similar and they play almost exactly the same. They both start out with U-Turner, which pretty much gains momentum, and although Zapdos can cause more switches than Flygon, the basic theme is the same. Flygon and Zapdos both provide momentum for Breloom to come in early and spore something and tear something apart. And then they have Heatran or Tyranitar for rocks and breaking. The point of these teams is that they cover virtually everything, and they are the pretty much absolute centerpiece of all DPP teams. Back in the day, it was Fire, Water, Grass with stuff like, Vaporeon. Well, actually, no. Fire, Water, Grass has been a running core for so long because it works in pretty much every situation. But this recent idea of momentum-based Breloom kind of stall-breaking balance, and even in general, this team is very well versed offense. Both iterations do because of ones like Starmie and Melodic having a fast offensive water, and also having something like Zapdos or Scarf Flygon, which do very well against offensive-based teams. These teams have such variation because they are all based on the same archetype. They all have the Fire, Water, Grass core, U-turn or momentum gaining Mon. It can be the Scarf or it can't be. You can honestly have Zapdos on the third team, although you probably have to put Starmie then on because you probably want a spinner. But this momentum-based theme of having a easy setup and constantly going back and forth with these Mons which have such amazing synergy is absolutely the most paramount and solid team building type in DPP at the moment. This archetype functions so well because it does well versus everything, and there are a million variations in the sets. You can have Calm Mind Jirachi. You can have stuff like SD Scizor like this team has. You can have a CD Flygon build and put that over Heatran, or put Heatran and Flygon in the same build. You can have a million variations and they will always come out as a solid team. You can have a Sub-Roost Zapdos as the lead and then don't even have a U-Turner, or maybe you do and it's Scizor. The variation here is endless. The 2 or 3 centerpieces are always going to be a Breloom and a Tyranitar and a bulky or fast enough water. That's what you need because those Mons deal well versus pretty much everything. You have checks to pretty much every Mon in the metagame, and you're not severely weak to any type. This is the beginner's team in DPP right now. Back in the day, it was Azelf Rat Cheesy offense, if you guys remember that. But nowadays, it's this. It's easy to run because not only is this team incredibly effective at what it does, but it's not actually hard to play. You don't need much planning or thinking when doing this. Not to say this doesn't require skill to win, that's not what I'm saying at all, but I am saying it's a very easy to run introductory team which runs very similar to teams in later metagames. Almost a retroactive effect, if I do say so myself, in the way that these teams fundamentally change the metagame. These saw a rise mostly in, I would say, I think it was 2013 is when I remember seeing the first iteration of BKC and Hot and Cold's team, and since then, this team has done amazing in shaping the metagame and pretty much making it centralized around it. I would go as far as saying that this team has helped eliminate really hard stall because Mons like Breloom have become incredibly popular and essentially put a monopoly on defense. Not to say defensive teams aren't there anymore. I mean, BKC, myself, and a lot of other DPP players enjoy running defensive stall-oriented teams. But the point is that Breloom is a very rough one to deal with, and you have to have certain techs and certain plays and certain knowledge about the metagame. So Breloom is a great Mon because defensive teams, back in the day, if you ask me what was an easy win, I would see a stall team with Skarmory and Blissey and Powdon, or, a spinner. Because pretty easily you could dismantle other Fire, Water, Grass cores. But Breloom is pretty much putting the metagame in a chokehold and punching the hell out of it. Because it's just so good and so universally available on pretty much every sand build and has amazing synergy with every single Mon on this team. Every single Mon on this team helps Breloom in a certain way. And because Breloom has an amazing way of not only putting Mons to sleep, almost essentially guaranteed, if they don't have sleep talk, that's it for them, but of punching holes in offensive cores, that it makes all these other Mons which may struggle by themselves compounding factors to breaking down defense. These types of builds are great because they do everything, and everyone can use them. You don't even need to be creative anymore in that aspect. And although some people can have specific builds that counter these types, which I'll get into later, as a universal application, these teams, they win. and you can see them in every single level of play. Just look at World Cup finals. The last team is more based on the Doug Show trapping phenomenon. I've always been a big supporter of like retroactive metagame revolutions, in that new trends affect old metagames and old generations. So while Doug Trio's craze, Doug Trio was a thing probably I think 2014 with the Zapdos thing. That new discovery more or less came out of the black and white surge, and like I think it was 2014 or 2013. But the Doug Trio reign in black and white kind of spread to the idea of Doug Trio Zapdos in DPP. This team beats up T-Tar's centralized teams because not only does Cresselia really put the hammer down on teams once their Tyranitar is eliminated and Sand is gone, but Doug Trio traps a lot of valuable Pokemon. Tyranitar, Non-Scarf Heatran, Starmie. If you don't have Aerial Ace, I guess you can't trap it, but I always run Aerial Ace, so Breloom, you can trap it with that, as long as you're not in Mach Punch range. You can pretty much trap anything that's on the ground to an effective level with a CB Doug Trio because of how strong Earthquake is and the amount of ground weaknesses that are in DPP. Because steals are valuable, and when you have things like Jirachi and Heatran or T-Tar on every team, you're going to get some success out of a U-turn based play. This is probably the best example I would give of an anti-meta team, and this team sits on overpopulation of Tyranitars and the proponent of having a T-Tar on every team. Doesn't make this an auto win, in fact, very far from it. This team still struggles to hell him back with Clefable because you really don't have a good counter to it. While Calm Cresselia can beat out Calm Clefable with just a single crit, a knockoff S-Toss T-Wave Clefable can pretty much wall this team to hell him back. You have two options essentially. Beat it in rain when Kingdra comes in and hope they have no other counter. Hit it with a CB Earthquake and hope that they don't knock you off and then proceed to wall you, or, maybe you can crit them. Or flinch it to death with Jirachi, which a Scarf Jirachi as a stall breaker is essentially abysmal. A team like this doesn't have a hazard remover either, so Clefable plus SR and Spikes pretty much dismantles teams like these. But you'll notice that the Doug Trio teams, and I reiterate this quite often, I believe that they are actually very good at countering teams like the second and the third one, because they subsist on Zapdos being enough. It's a good enough dismantler that it can get a U-turn off easy, and then you bring in Doug Trio, T-Tar is gone, and then what do they really have for Cresselia? Especially once you have Rain Dance. Additionally, Rain Dance Kingdra does really well against these teams because they lack a very strong special absorber. Although in my case, they have Melodic on one of these teams, most of these revolve around the Starmie, Breloom, Heatran, and T-Tar core. So when you have a one that's really strong like Kingdra, you can have a reaction to that and have a just general threat level increased. Like I said, this team kind of struggles against more defensive builds because really its main purpose is to trap T-Tar based balances. But these four teams are key because they represent the new discoveries of DPP. Clefable stall, the balance of Breloom centralization and T-Tar cores, along with momentum gaining, and the reaction to it. Doug Trio, Zapdos, Kingdra, and Cresselia, ways to beat out balance through strategy. But how did we get here? How did we arrive at this place in a metagame? Where did all these new ideas and teams come from? Well, to start off, I'm going to be looking at the first, the fourth, and the fifth team. These are all stall-based teams. These are teams that are based upon waiting the opponent out with hazards and residual damage, or pursuing them with Scarf Tar. You'll notice that Scarf Tar is actually not really common anymore. It's not uncommon, but it's more or less used a lot less. Phrasing. But it's used a lot less because Scarf Tar just isn't as good as a utility mon anymore. It's still solid, but when you have ones like Clefable and T-Tar might possibly be your only way to break through a Clefable stall, you might prefer CB, or you might prefer to not run hard stall at all, which is the type of team which Scarf Tyranitar used to survive on. Back in the day, Scarf T-Tar would pursue Rotoms and Gengars, problematic ones for stall. It would be an all-around check to pretty much everything, but Scarf Tar has become a liability to Breloom. Breloom eats these teams alive, specifically the Breloom plus T-Tar core. Now, you may be looking at these teams and be like, well, what do you mean PvC? They have a Celebi, they both have a Zapdos, and that team has a Gliscor, a Skarmory, a Rotom. these teams can't possibly be weak to Breloom to the level you're describing. And if you take Breloom as, a Pokemon existing in a vacuum, you're probably right. Breloom by itself cannot win games. But Breloom plus Tyranitar essentially dismantles all these cores. Add Stealth Rock in the mix, and anything that lays down Stealth Rocks and doesn't immediately get spun on, and you have a whole new metagame. You have a whole new world, and a lot of the traditional counters are immediately forced to switch out or play the momentum game. There's really no way around it. That's just how it is. So these old stalls that Blue and BKC and myself used to spam in tournament games don't really work anymore because they fall apart to a Breloom sleeping your Blissey, a Breloom easily coming in on your Powder Tyranitar, sporing something, and if you have Rocks up, an easy switch to your own CB T-Tar or any T-Tar or anything that threatens the immediate switch-in of Celebi Zapdos, and you're done. And keep in mind, Skarmory is taking a lot of damage from a Focus Punch switch-in, and one wrong prediction could lead it to being killed. You're looking at a team and stall archetypes which are dead, or dying, or inefficient in a metagame which really doesn't care for them. A metagame which has enough momentum to force them to switch, and if hazards are up, the game is over. A metagame in which CB T-Tar plus Breloom essentially eviscerates all these. A metagame which, with these archetypes that you saw on the last slide, with Breloom momentum gaining plus T-Tar plus hazards, this constant barrage and anti-defensive mentality and ability to pretty much just deconstruct these teams, because once one of these members falls, it's over, essentially. Okay, exaggeration, but these teams, early on, if they lose a member, it's very bad. If a team loses Zapdos early on, then what does it really have for a Breloom counter? Seed Bomb, Focus Punch, or even just Superpower, or maybe it can spore another Mun. You're losing ground here no matter what. These teams don't like Breloom. And while, yeah, you can say that it has Celebi, or maybe it has Aerial Ace Gliscor as a counter, those Muns still don't like being spored temporarily. So your best bet, really, in that case, is the hope for sporing a fodder Mun, which, like, having a 50% Swampert and switching into the Spore, and once that is absorbed, Celebi and Gliscor can reliably switch into Breloom. Then again, you also have the threat of T-Tar or a U-Turner, or something like that, which can erase Celebi, or Gliscor's overall reliability as being a switch in the bulky waters, or Gengar, stuff like that, and put a liability marker on it. These teams, especially considering a lot of them have a weakness to hazards and a tendency to really be unable to remove them reliably, as Starmie is becoming worse and worse of a spinner. Starmie's reliance is dying out. People don't run Starmie as much as they used to because you have T-Tar at every turn, and you have U-Turners at every turn, and you have Breloom at every turn, and you have Muns, which Starmie used to switch into, pretty much taking it out. The repopulation of Infernape, the idea of HP Grass Pasho Heatran, Starmie overall not being able to beat out any stall because now every single defensive team usually carries a Clefable. You're losing out here. Starmie is inefficient now. Not a bad mod, it's still probably an A+ Pokemon, but it's not to the level of hazard removal which it used to be. And because all it takes is SR plus a Scarf Tart switch in to get the ball rolling on Momentum and Breloom, you're looking at the pretty much collapse of these teams. They're not as good as they used to be, and that's okay. You're moving towards a new paradigm of defense. But these teams that you used to see spam and Smoke and Tour are slowly dying out, because while back in the day they could reliably beat pretty much any Fire, Water, Grass core, the momentum gaining traction of Flygon, Breloom, Zapdos, Heatran, Jirachi, plus SR, T-Tar, Breloom, ticks them apart, and they don't have a way to react to that. These teams used to be great because things like Quagsire would destroy the, Combine Suicunes, and could switch in on the Starmies, and Bulky Waters, and walled some Gyarados. Because Breloom just wasn't popular enough for it to be that big of an issue, and even when it was, once in a while, you technically had Skarmory and Zapdos, and maybe even a Psychic Starmie to deal with it, or a faster Heatran. But now, with Breloom being incredibly popular and on every team, and often having friends to help it out break stall, you're looking at these teams being inefficient and unable to keep up with the metagame. Scarf T-Tar is a liability, they're just not as good anymore. Then you have the second and the third one. The third one looks pretty familiar. In fact, it's essentially a early version of the Breloom T-Tar builds. Although this is a more defensive one with Scarf Tar, you can change the ones around in pretty much any order, and you can get a very similar result. This team was popular, but it wasn't incredibly popular. In fact, it took I think until about 2015 or late 2014 for the real Breloom T-Tar Zapdos momentum gaining based Hazard Wave to take off. This team is solid, I've already went over it, and this team is a pretty damn good reaction to these defensive teams. It can be defensive, offensive, the stats can be changed, and Swampert can be switched up for, something like a Heatran. It doesn't really matter. You can switch around the Muns to a decent amount, and you can have basically the same team. And that flexibility and core membership of T-Tar Breloom plus Momentum and optional Spinner creates a problem for these other types of teams. This would be what I would consider an early type of the reaction. The Jirachi Lucario one, however, is a little more interesting. This team isn't, obsolete in the modern metagame. You just don't see it as much anymore. And in fact, I think Lucario is actually better now than it has been the past year or so, because people are forgetting how dangerous it is. Gliscor is not used as much anymore. Powdon is not used as much anymore. Zapdos is used, but it's often the more frail version, and Scarf Tyranitar is not really around anymore, so you can run Crunch all you want. I mean, Bullet Punch is still a great option, but the lack of Scarf Tyranitar is pretty damn great for Lucario as well, because that used to be a big check, a big gotcha on stall if, you didn't have another resort. If you lost everything, you had to hope that they had Crunch, or they didn't have Bullet Punch. You're looking at a team which isn't bad by any means. It was just a real big standard team. And looking at the reaction of this, a team like this doesn't really struggle versus things like Breloom, essentially. It's not very good against them, though, because this team often had things like CB-Tar and Scarf Rotom, which a switch and a Spore will pretty much seal the deal. Breloom runs the metagame, and having a big vulnerability to it is not good, but still, it's offensive enough where it can keep it on the ropes. Lucario, however, does get annoyed by Mach Punch, especially if it's not already a +2, so keep in mind, Breloom has an effect on these teams too. This used to be essentially the earliest idea of stall breaking with Nyx Knight, having a lead which could either be Jirachi or Metagross to open the field, and then having CB-Tar to pursue the Rotoms, and then Lucario just cleaning it up. I would say that this team is one of the earliest ideas of Fighting type plus T-Tar in DPP really being successful and coming to the main front, and essentially everyone abusing and using this type of team. It's good. It's good because it does the same thing that Breloom and T-Tar do nowadays. It takes out Ghosts, it pursues Celebes and Zapdoses, and overall it wreaks havoc. T-Tar in this role did a more of a breaking route with things like Stone Edge, hitting Skarmory, or Crunch or Aqua Tail hitting a Powdon. But nowadays, it's all about the pursuit, or the threat of the pursuit, more than the actual Stone Edge breaking. So these are the more popular teams of prior, and as you can tell, I did a lot of the highlight on the defensive aspect, because like I said, I think the reaction of momentum-based is pretty defensively oriented. The reaction to these hard stall defense teams that used to be spammed was countered by a momentum-based Brain and T-Tar combination. Those teams still do really well versus balance though. And the thing is, a lot of the balanced teams that you're going to be facing are actually really close to each other, because the Breloom T-Tar Firewater Grass build is essentially the complete scene of balance in DPP, at least for teams that are easy to run, flexible, and easy to make. So these are the big players. I've already went over these, but I'm going to go a little more in detail, not too much, and this will probably be a quick slide. But you have Breloom. What is it about Breloom? I've mentioned it and said, yeah, it can Spore and it can break stall, but that's not the whole thing. Breloom recently has also had priority introduced to its set. It doesn't even need somebody more to break stall. It doesn't need the Focus Punch set and sacrifice of its own health to just put someone to sleep and then use Superpower. What is it about Breloom? It's that it has a great typing for pretty much fucking over defense at any given time, at any given rates, and it has the ability to switch in on things like Clefable, of course be wearing of Ice Beam, Knockoff, and Thunder Wave, Blissey, Hippowdon, Tyranitar, all these Mons, which are staples on defensive teams, it can switch into them. It doesn't really care about taking any damage because the risk is very low. With Tyranitar, you're going to have to be more careful because a CB Tyranitar still hurts, but things like Scarftar were pretty much fish food for it, and coming in on a Pursuit was a pretty damn great way for it to get in. Or coming in off of a Scarf Zap a U-turn on Zapdos, or coming in off of a kill, anything. Breloom is pretty easy to get in versus defensive teams. And what is it about Breloom that makes it so good against everything? Well, it's sleep. It's the ability for it to sleep anything and pretty much support the rest of the team. Breloom by itself, like I said, is a good mon, but just sticking it on a team and saying, I'm not stall weak is pretty naive. In fact, it's probably inferior, because just saying, yeah, I want to put Breloom on this team doesn't really do much for yourself. But having a combination of Breloom and some of these mons, Tyranitar, Zapdos, Starmie, Jirachi, or Heatran, is great, because alone these teams struggle with defense. Together, they do great. Breloom has a synergy that's reliable for all of these mons, and it creates a very centralized metagame. Clefable in the same route. It's, in a way, you can almost say that Clefable is kind of a reaction to Breloom and the teams which followed it, because Clefable doesn't care about hazards, and its type of stall often might not even carry a spinner. It doesn't really give that much of a damn about spinning, and because of the centerpiece in a defensive aspect doesn't care about spinning, the overall need for a spinner like Starmie is reduced. And keep in mind, Starmie is now devalued as a spinner because of the presence of things like Tyranitar and Zapdos and Breloom, and the omnipresent pursuit. Clefable and its stall is a reaction. When did it become popular? Probably around, I think it was SPL 6 when Heist first used the Venusaur Gliscor team, and it quickly became one of my favorites because it was reliable. That team, however, did have a weakness to Breloom, which I think every defensive team ever is going to have some problem with Breloom to some degree. But the team was solid nonetheless, and it pretty much beat out almost all other types of balance, and even other defensive teams. Although, in the long run, if you were not running Combine Clef, you would have a lot of trouble with them. Why is it still used so much? Because it has pretty much a million ways of utility. This thing can even put up Stealth Rocks, and having that asset of rocks on a defensive team if you just need it is great. Clefable is used so much because it beats out a lot of common sets, and it potentially also eviscerates stall. Having a stall mon, which in a way acts as a gotcha to other stall, is great. And it also can beat out last mon combine situations too, because it can combine up itself, and it has decent enough coverage where it can actually reliably kill things like Dragonite or threaten Breloom on a switch. And while Blissey could do the same for Flamethrower, Blissey often had to heal up, so Clefable in a way is able to do pretty much everything Blissey did, although only special walling is devalued in it. It can't wall as well, especially as Blissey, because a +1 Hydro Pump from a Suicune hurts it like hell and gets to a KO it, and an RD Kingdra can Hydro Pump it to about 20%. But overall, it's a very useful mon because it doesn't need to heal up every single turn. It can knock things off, it can T-Wave them, and it isn't worried about spikes or Stealth Rock. It's a reaction to defense in the same way Breloom was, only Breloom is more easy to fit on balance, while Clefable finds its home on almost purely defensive teams. The big players of Zapdos, Tyranitar, and these other three are pretty much equal, I would say, although Tyranitar or Zapdos are probably, in my opinion, I think they're actually, I could throw Jirachi in there too. The little trifecta there are probably the best they've ever been. Heatran is really good too, but I actually don't use Heatran or Starmie that much anymore because Heatran just isn't as appealing. I find that there's a lot of Clefable nowadays, and I have to think about exploding on it. I find that T-Tar is everywhere. I find that Infernape is getting more popular. I find that Breloom has a Mach Punch and it can finish me off. I find that I don't have the ability to break as easy as I would like. I find there's more Melodic nowadays, and Melodic is a pretty much one-hit kill on the Heatran if you're not running Pasho, and you have to explode if you want to kill it, and that's not always the optimal play. Heatran is not as good anymore, but it's still good. It's still a fantastic mon, and it still shapes the metagame, just not in the way it used to. Really, you're looking at teams which are over-centralized around these two players and a momentum which Zapdos and Tyranitar bring. But now we get to the real thing. The real thing which goes past just surface-level team analysis. Why is the metagame like it is? Why did it have to come this way? And to that I say, because the player base has changed fundamentally. Fuck you, ABR. Fuck you, Blunder. Kidding. Joking. Fuck you too, Finch, because I know you're gonna get salty for me not mentioning you in this video, so I'll extend that to you as well. I'm not kidding. 3 points, and one is team preview and the dynamic it has created. A lot of you guys watching this video have not been playing as long as I have. I have been playing this game since 2008 competitively, late 2008 on Shoddy. I didn't grow up with Team Preview. Team Preview was, while it encompassed the majority, because Black and White in 2010 introduced it, of my competitive career, my learning curve did not come from Team Preview. My learning curve came from my days of looking at a team and seeing which Muns it had. Even when Black and White was out, my heart was still in DPP, and some people, including myself, can never really leave their roots. The training I received in the roughly 2 years I played DPP nonstop when I was a kid shaped me, and it shaped how I think about the game and how I predict and how I act and who I am. But Team Preview is the thing that a lot of the new guys like ABR, Blunder, and other modern DPP players grew up with. The push towards a right in front of you, everything exposed, simple. I'm not going to say simple, but I'm going to say simple as in you can see the team. That's what I mean. Because I'm not saying games are more simple now than they were back then. That's not right. That's not factually correct. But I am saying you have the ability to see the team your opponent is bringing. You know from the start what their entire team is, and you can make educated guesses off of that. If you've ever talked to ABR or Blunder, they think that, at least in DPP, because of the power level of a lot of the Pokemon, in ADV or GSC or RBY, mostly GSC and ADV, they don't really care as much because the power and explicit strength of things like, I don't know, CB8 or Specs Tran or whatever is not there. But in DPP, that power is present. And in my opinion, I can't say I did a research paper on this, but it is the predictability which these players subsist on in the modern metagames of 5, 6, and 7 that leads to the centralization and hyper-centralization of DPP. In a way, prediction has become a chore. Predicting the Mun itself is hard. It's something that these people are not used to. There is a sharp learning curve of team predicting, and most people just ascribe it to luck. There's a lot of skill in predicting the 6th or the 5th or the 4th, or even, 4 members at a time in DPP, and modern players can't do that as well as older players. It's just something you have to grow up with, essentially. So why does this matter? Why does having team preview in the metagame matter at all? Why would there be any retroactive element? Because Gen 5 and Gen 6 and Gen 7 are clearly different than DPP. Well, it has to do with predictability. It has to do with the fundamental strength of a team and the lack of risks people really like to take. Metagames become centralized, there is no doubt. In any late-stage metagame, there will be a pretty general consensus about what is the best type of team. But there's variation. For example, both the teams that Blunder and AB are using in this very recent Tour playoff game are pretty different. I mean, you have the Muns like Garchomp and Latios and Excadrill, which are pretty common, but you also have Muns like Scizor or Hydreigon, which, while not unpopular at all, you don't see Kyubi or Slowking, around that often. The composition of these teams is not based on weather either. There's no Tyranitar. What I'm trying to say is, because you have team preview, people are willing to stray away from the paradigm. They immediately see what will work and what won't work at the beginning of the game. A person is using an outlandish strategy in Black and White, or any Gen 6 or 7. Immediately they recognize the viability of that strategy in that game. In DPP, you have to guess. You have to keep it in the back burner. You have to wonder if it's really going to pay off or not. That is why, in my opinion, these players that now populate the metagames, that are now the top players, are using these incredibly standard over-centralized DPP teams which rely on this incredible centralization and reliability. They rely on something that works, and what works is the idea of the momentum-gaining Breloom T-Tar core, because it's just so good, and it shuts down all standard defensive builds. It's a reaction, and it's a reaction of comfort. The retroactive idea of team preview is omnipresent. You can see it in every game. People bitching and complaining because they don't have team preview. It's not there, so they get pissed about it because it's always there. You're always able to see your opponent's team. And guessing mons to them is tantamount to crisis. It's ridiculous. Why should I have to guess my opponent's team? Why is it not there in front of me? And the player feels the same about his own team because he wants something reliable. He wants something that won't just outright lose. He wants to have a game plan before the game even starts. He wants to know that I'm going to have something reliable. And in my opinion, that has only increased the centralization in DPP. Wonky strategies would probably be better even if you had team preview, because unpredictability of game plan and viability, people who aren't used to that and not used to having those strategies, typically it's not in their comfort zone. So that's when you see creativity in DPP, it tends to be only in alterations of already existing strict paradigms, like the Zapdos, Jirachi, Gyarados, Firewater, Grass Core. Team preview has made people complacent. It has made people more used to the standard, and has essentially become a reason that DPP is reduced to what it is now. The evolution of players has a big effect on the metagame. Keep this in mind. DPP mirrors most late-stage modern metagames now. I think that's correct, but I think DPP is essentially the permanent late-stage metagame. There's no doubt that DPP is a blended metagame also with the player base, and I think it's because of both of the factors of the team preview and the base blending. Because of the team preview, it has pretty much resulted in this ultra centralization. We don't really touch DPP anymore. We don't ban anything, and in a way, bans have almost been introduced as a way to keep the metagame fresh and evolving. There's not really that presence in DPP. A Sandvale ban didn't really do all that much. So the late stage metagame of DPP, combined with no real reason to evolve because of the player base not really wanting to evolve or finding creativity, creates a compounding effect of a static metagame. The external factors come from the player base, come from the future changes and the retroactive revolution of metagames that actually came after it. And I would say that the majority of the changes in DPP that you see now are directly paralleled with effects and metagame trends you see in modern metagames. Dugtrio, Hazard Resistant Stall, Clefable, Magic Guard, Trapping, U-turn based Volturn things like that. Where do you think people got that idea from? Black and white. Volturn was not a thing in DPP, U-turn was, and while Volturn doesn't actually exist in DPP, what I mean is the pure momentum coming from a style of team which has 2 or 3 U-turns. You're looking at an entirely new metagame shaped by those that came after it. And that's what I mean by postmodern, whether I use it correctly in the art history sense or not. It's postmodern because it's affected and it's shaped by the things that came after it. DPP is dead. Tiering changes to it are not really open to the public anymore. And I don't think it will change again for at least another 2 or 3 years. So for now, with the current player base, this is what we're looking at. And that's pretty much it. Thank you guys for watching. If you have any comments, any suggestions, leave them down in the comment section or message me on Discord or whatever. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you liked my video back. I'll see you guys in the next one. Like the video, subscribe, and I'm out.